What would you do if a naked woman, bloody trembling eyes wide with terror, appeared clinging to your fence at sunrise? No words, no warning, just raw desperation wrapped in nothing but skin and fear. Thaddeus Crane had long stopped believing in people. For 12 years he lived alone, spoke only to cattle and wind, and let the silence bury what Martha left behind. But that morning, as he stepped onto his porch with a chipped mug and heavy eyes, silence shattered like glass. She was there, bare bruised, clinging to his fence like it was her last lifeline. And when Thaddeus stepped forward, she looked up, green eyes, wild breath, shaking. "Please," she whispered, "don't let them find me." 4 words. That's all it took to flip the world on its head. He saw the dust trail 3 riders fast focused. He knew their type, rode with their kind, buried their kind. "Who's after you?" he asked. "Colt Devlin," she said. "He bought me, from my husband." In that instant, Thaddeus stood between a past he'd buried and a present screaming for blood, and he knew silence was no longer an option. Thaddeus Crane had built his life around silence. 12 long years, no neighbors, no visitors, no words spoken that weren't to a horse or the wind. But that morning, silence shattered. It wasn't the sun that woke him. It was a sound wet, ragged, broken. A sound he hadn't heard in over a decade, a human sob. He stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand. Frost still kissed the grass. The air was so still it could snap. Then he saw her, clinging to his fence like it was the only thing holding her to this world. Naked, shivering, blood on her knees, dirt smeared across her thighs, hair wild and tangled, her back rising and falling like something had chased the life out of her. His mug shook. She didn't speak, didn't even look up. Her fingers clutched the wood like it was breath, and in that moment, everything Thaddeus had spent 12 years trying to forget came rushing back. Martha's grave, the betrayal of the town, the promises whispered to ghosts. He should have turned back inside, closed the door, let the world pass like a storm. Instead, he walked, boots crunching frost, rifle still hanging untouched by the fireplace behind him. When he reached the fence, she finally lifted her face. Green eyes, wide, terrified, bruised. "Please," she whispered, "don't let them find me." 4 words. They struck him harder than any bullet ever had. "Who's after you?" he asked, voice low, steady. She shook her head, panicked. "They'll kill me. They'll kill you." Thaddeus scanned the horizon, and there dust trails. Riders, 3, moving fast. His pulse kicked. Muscles remembered what they'd long forgotten. "What's your name?" he asked. "Magnolia." "I'm Thaddeus," he said. "Come inside, now." As he wrapped his coat around her, gunmetal clouds began to crawl across the sky. And somewhere behind them, death was riding hard. Thaddeus Crane didn't choose loneliness. It chose him. Or maybe he made a pact with it. After Martha died and the town looked the other way, Thaddeus stopped asking anything of people. He gave them nothing, and in return, they left him alone. His ranch became a graveyard of memories. Every fence post he built with his bare hands, every cracked tile in the kitchen she'd once danced across barefoot. Even the wind felt like her voice fading. He hadn't fired a gun in a decade, hadn't spoken to another soul in years. But now Magnolia was here, bleeding, trembling. And she wasn't just running from men. She was running from a system, a machine that turned people into property. Inside the cabin, Thaddeus wrapped her in a wool blanket. She sat by the fireplace, clutching his coat like it could keep her alive. Her body flinched with every hoofbeat echoing off the hills. Thaddeus moved to the window. Dust clouds, 3 riders, still coming. They had the look. Not bounty hunters, enforcers, hired wolves in tailored vests. He reached above the mantel, pulled down the old Winchester, loaded 6 shells. The rhythm felt foreign, then familiar, like a song he used to sing before grief stole his voice. Magnolia looked up. "They'll kill you." He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the rifle, at the photo of Martha on the shelf beside it, and then at the woman now shaking by his fire. He spoke without turning. "Martha once told me if you see someone drowning and you walk away, you might as well be the one holding their head under." Outside, the horses were getting close. Time was gone. Choices were simple. Thaddeus set the trap door open. "Down there. Root cellar. Stay hidden, no matter what happens." "What about you?" she asked, voice cracking. "I've lived through worse," he lied. He closed the door just as boots hit the ground outside. 3 sets. Purposeful. Confident. Thaddeus stepped onto his porch rifle, cradled like a warning. 12 years ago, he let fear and grief drive him into silence. Today, he'd speak again with bullets. Magnolia Hayes had been sold more times than she could count. Not always with money, sometimes with favors, sometimes with silence. The first betrayal came from the man who married her young and gambled her future away in a saloon game. The second came from a sheriff who looked the other way. The third wore a smile and called himself a businessman, Colt Devlin. He said she belonged to him, and for a long time she believed it. It wasn't chains that bound her. It was shame. Shame that no one came for her. Shame that she didn't leave sooner. Shame that when she finally ran, she had to shatter a window and bleed for it. Now inside a stranger's root cellar, dirt beneath her fingernails wrapped in a coat that still smelled of tobacco and rain. Magnolia realized something: she was still alive. And not just breathing, but burning. Above her, the crack of a rifle echoed through the floorboards. Then another. Muffled curses. The distant thud of boots hitting earth. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She counted. 1 shot, 2. Silence. She pulled the blanket tighter, heart pounding like hooves in her chest. For the first time, she wasn't frozen. She wasn't hoping someone would save her. She was thinking, where was the revolver? Did the trapdoor lock from below? Would Thaddeus survive if they found her again? Her hands stopped shaking. She rose slowly like something uncoiling, brushed dust off her legs, reached for the second gun Thaddeus had left near the shelf. The weight of it in her palm was strange and familiar. She remembered the night Colt had tossed it to her. "Any woman under my roof better know how to defend what I paid for," he sneered. She'd hated him for that, and now it might just save her life. Magnolia crept up the steps and cracked the trap door. Thaddeus was crouched near the window, left arm slick with blood. One of the enforcers, Ezra, was crawling across the floor, reaching for a dropped pistol. Magnolia didn't freeze, didn't call for help. She stepped out. Ezra looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "Magnolia, wait. Please, I didn't want to." She raised the revolver. "This is for Sarah," she said, "and for Mary, and for every girl you held down while Devlin made his deals." She pulled the trigger. Ezra collapsed, mouth still open, heart finally still. Silence fell again, but this time it belonged to her. Thaddeus turned, eyes filled not with shock, but with understanding. Magnolia stood in the fading light of the window, breath steady, hands firm on the grip of the weapon. She had been hunted, beaten, bought, but now she was something else entirely. She wasn't just a survivor. She was justice in bare feet and blood-stained cloth, and she was just getting started. The sound came first. Hoofbeats, sharp, heavy, confident. The kind that didn't slow down at fences. Thaddeus Crane stepped onto the porch rifle at his side, boots planted firm. The wind carried dust down from the ridge where 3 riders approached like thunder on horseback. They moved with precision, not like men searching, but like men collecting. The one in front wore a black vest and a silver chain. Cold eyes. A smirk, like a man who'd never been told no. "Morning," he called. "Name's Pike. My boys and I are looking for something belongs to our employer." "Lots of things out here belong to folks," Thaddeus replied, casual but loaded. "A woman," Pike said, still smiling. "Dark hair? Might not have been wearing much when she ran." "You seen anyone like that?" Thaddeus didn't flinch. "This is cattle country. Lots of wild things come through." Pike's eyes drifted to the porch railing. 2 coffee mugs. His smile sharpened. "Tracks lead right to your door, old man. Let's not play dumb." Behind Pike, the other 2 shifted in their saddles, hands near their hips. "Guns. Ready." Thaddeus saw the setup. Pike talked. The others circled. Standard ambush script. "I mind if you search," Thaddeus said evenly. "Private land." Pike chuckled and pulled a crumpled paper from his vest. "Got a warrant. Devlin's signature, sheriff's stamp. Official business." Thaddeus didn't even look. "That's not a warrant. That's a threat with a ribbon on it. You calling the law a liar, I'm calling Devlin a man who buys paper easier than cattle feed." That did it. The rider to Pike's left reached first, but Thaddeus was already moving. His first shot hit center chest, sent the man off his horse like a rag doll. Second shot tore through the shoulder of the neck, spinning him in the saddle. Pike dropped, rolled, fired. Bullets cracked past Thaddeus's head, splintered wood beside him. He dove behind a trough, mud and blood mixing. 4 bullets left. One killer still crawling, and Magnolia somewhere behind the door holding a pistol and her breath. This was the price of saying no in a land ruled by men like Devlin, and Thaddeus was ready to pay it in full. The cabin floor shook with gunfire. The air smelled like smoke, sweat, and old wood burning at the edges of hell. Thaddeus was crouched behind the water trough, blood oozing from his shoulder jaw, locked tight. Pike had gone to ground behind the wagon, trading bullets through splintered air. Inside, Magnolia moved. No orders, no permission. Just instinct, hot, focused, unrelenting. She kicked the trapdoor open and stepped into the cabin, barefoot but steady. Her eyes scanned the floor. Ezra Devlin's wounded enforcer was crawling across the boards toward his pistol, slick with his own blood, but still dangerous. Magnolia didn't hesitate. She moved fast, faster than fear could rise. Ezra looked up. "Wait, Maggie, please don't." But he wasn't talking to a girl anymore. He was looking into the eyes of someone who had been made and unmade 100 times, and finally rebuilt herself. She raised the pistol. Her hands didn't tremble. Her voice was ice. "For Sarah," she said. The shot cracked through the cabin like judgment. Ezra collapsed, gasping, then silent. Outside, Pike roared, "You killed Ezra!" His voice cracked with fury and something else, fear. Magnolia stepped to the window. Her face was streaked with dirt, blood, and rain. But her spine stood straighter than it had in years. "You're next," she whispered. Pike fired wildly, bullets shattering the window frame, grazing the door. Magnolia ducked low, heart hammering, but this time she wasn't hiding. She was waiting. Thaddeus took the moment, swung out from cover, and fired once. The bullet slammed into Pike's chest, throwing him back against the wagon wheel. His gun fell. His body slumped. Silence. Just the wind, and the slow patter of rain, returning to dust. Thaddeus stumbled into the cabin, clutching his wound. Magnolia rushed to him, ripped fabric, bound it tight. No questions, no panic. Her hands knew what to do. "I've done this before," she murmured. "Colts, girls, we patched each other up. When we could." Thaddeus studied her as she worked. The girl who'd clung to his fence wasn't gone. She'd been forged into steel. He reached out, gently touched her cheek. She didn't flinch. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know," she answered, tying the knot. "But I'm not running anymore." Outside, the sun broke through cloud, casting gold across 3 bodies in the yard. But something darker was on the wind. This was just the first wave. The real storm hadn't even arrived. The yard was still bleeding. 3 bodies in the dirt, smoke curling from the rifle barrel. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Inside, Thaddeus leaned back against the cabin wall. His shirt was soaked through part blood, part sweat. Magnolia tightened the last strip of fabric over his shoulder, her hands steady, jaw clenched. She paused, then said the words that turned his world upside down. "You're not the only one they came for." Thaddeus met her eyes. "What do you mean?" Magnolia stood crossed to the window, watched the ridgeline like something might crawl over it any second. "Colt doesn't just own the saloon," she said. "He's got ties with the railroad. There's a new line planned Copper Ridge to Deadwood. Fast freight government subsidies. And?" Thaddeus asked. She turned. "Your land's in the middle of it." Silence. It settled between them like the dust outside. They've been buying out ranches up and down this valley. Quiet like at first. But not everyone's selling. So Colt started pushing. Some ranchers disappeared. Some gave up and left. Others, they're buried under bad luck and broken fences. Thaddeus's jaw tightened. "And I'm the last," she nodded. "You in this place. You were next either way. I just gave them a reason to come early." He looked around at the walls. He built the chair Martha once sat in the land he bled for. Every fence post a memory. Every acre a wound that had finally started to scar. And now, it was just a line on someone else's map. He stood slower than usual. Pain made his spine curve. But his eyes still sharp. "I thought this was about you," he said. "It is," Magnolia whispered. "But it's also about this. About power. About people who think they can take anything just because they've got ink on paper and guns on payroll." Thaddeus stepped out onto the porch. The wind had shifted. Drier now, hotter. Like fire coming through the earth itself. He narrowed his eyes toward the west. How long before Colt sends more? Magnolia followed him out. Looked to the sky. 2 hours, maybe 3. Pike was supposed to signal when he found me. Thaddeus nodded slowly. Then he said something he hadn't said in years. "All right." Magnolia looked at him. "All right?" He glanced at the graves he hadn't dug yet. The tools leaning against the barn. The broken world he once let fall apart. "We make a stand," he said. They didn't wear black hats. They wore uniforms. Blue coats, brass buttons. U.S. cavalry riding hard across the valley like they carried justice in their saddlebags. But Thaddeus knew better. He watched from the porch as 8 soldiers fanned out across his land. Precision, discipline, a textbook maneuver to box in a threat, only this time the threat was truth. Magnolia froze in the doorway. Her face went pale. "Oh, God." Colt sent word. He told them I was a fugitive. Thaddeus nodded grimly. "And now they've got a legal excuse to finish what his men couldn't." The lead rider slowed, dismounted. Young face, cold eyes, sword at his hip. A man who'd read law from a book but learned power from men like Devlin. "I'm Lieutenant Morrison," he called out. "We're here on official orders. There's a federal fugitive hiding on this property, wanted for theft and assault." Thaddeus stepped down from the porch, hands loose at his sides. "What's her name?" "Magnolia Hayes, also known as Magnolia Devlin." The officer's voice didn't even flinch over the lie. "She's not here," Thaddeus said flatly. Morrison's eyes scanned the bodies in the yard. blood, bullet wounds. One of his men whispered something in his ear. Morrison nodded once. "Looks like you've had trouble," he said. "3 men, armed, killed by one old rancher. They came to rob me. I stopped them. Or maybe they came to retrieve what was stolen." Thaddeus didn't blink. "You call women property now?" Lieutenant Morrison didn't answer. Instead, he signaled his men. 4 soldiers dismounted and headed toward the barn and outbuildings. "Just a routine search," Morrison said smoothly. "Unless you've got something to hide." Inside, Magnolia ducked behind the cabin wall, pistol clutched tight. If they found her armed, they'd shoot first and file the report later. A soldier emerged moments later holding a blood-stained shirt. One of Thaddeus's, the one Magnolia had used to bind his wound. Still wet, the soldier reported. "Trap door in the kitchen's been opened. Looks like someone's hiding." Morrison's gaze locked onto Thaddeus. "So, where is she?" Thaddeus didn't move, didn't answer. The silence stretched like a fuse. Then, a rifle cracked. One of Morrison's men cried out, dropped behind a trough, clutching his leg. Another shot closer, more precise. "Sniper," someone shouted. From the rocky outcrop behind the barn, Magnolia had taken position. The mine entrance. She'd moved while they were watching him. Smart, steady, deadly. Morrison drew his saber, pressed it to Thaddeus's throat. "Call her off. Now." But Thaddeus smiled through the blood. "She's not yours to command anymore." The rocks didn't echo. They swallowed sound. A trick of the canyon walls, old silver veins, and collapsed timber, perfect for a woman who'd learned how to vanish. Magnolia lay prone on the ridge above the barn, rifle nestled into her shoulder. Eyes steady behind iron sights. Sweat dripped into her brow. The mine entrance behind her reeked of dust and decay, but it offered cover shadows and most of all range. Below, soldiers scrambled, one man down, another pinned behind a trough. Morrison barked orders, saber flashing like it still meant something. But every time he stood tall, a bullet cracked nearby, snapping the air. She wasn't aiming to kill. Not yet. She was sending a message. The girl they thought they owned was gone. They'd made her a ghost. Now she was the one haunting them. Inside the cabin, Thaddeus stood motionless, Morrison's blade still pressed to his throat. But the fear was gone from his face. In its place, calm. Not because he knew he'd survive, but because she was still fighting. Another shot. A tin bucket exploded behind a private trying to flank left. "She's moving," one man shouted. "We can't see her." "You don't need to see her," Thaddeus said, voice low. "You just need to understand she's not leaving." Morrison's hand trembled. Behind them, Magnolia adjusted her angle. Her breath was slow, her pulse finely even. Not from training, from resolve. She'd spent years being told to look down. Now she owned the high ground. She spotted Morrison still posturing, still pretending he wasn't outmatched. His men, crouched and bleeding, weren't following orders anymore. They were just trying to stay alive. She chambered another round. This one wasn't for warning. Then a voice rang out across the valley. Deep. Commanding. Not Morrison's. "Lieutenant Morrison, stand down." Magnolia froze. From the far hill, a single rider approached, gray uniform, hard shoulders, the gold trim of authority glinting in the sun. Colonel's stripes, real ones. Colonel Hartwell. The cavalry shifted. Confusion spread. Morrison lowered his saber half an inch. Thaddeus smiled. "Looks like your commanding officer finally showed." Hartwell dismounted, boots thudding heavy against dry earth. He surveyed the scene, wounded soldiers, bullet holes, a saber at a civilian's throat. His jaw clenched. "Explain this, Lieutenant, now," Morrison stammered. "We were tracking a fugitive? Following legal? Hartwell snapped. You call this legal Magnolia weighted rifle steady? She didn't trust uniforms. Not anymore. But for the first time in years, sirs, she heard something in a man's voice she hadn't heard since she was a girl. Justice. Colonel Hartwell didn't speak for the first 10 seconds. He didn't have to. The silence was louder than the gunfire that had come before it. His eyes swept the yard. 3 civilian bodies, 4 wounded soldiers, a saber pressed to a rancher's neck. Morrison shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the blade in his hand. He lowered it slowly, but the damage was done. Explain this, Hartwell said again, his voice like gravel in judgment. Sir Morrison stammered. We had intelligence. Copper Ridge filed charges. A woman named Magnolia Hayes wanted for theft, fraud, and assault. We followed legal orders to retrieve her. Hartwell narrowed his eyes. You brought 8 men. You pulled steel on a citizen. You fired rounds on private property, and that was your plan. A Morrison swallowed hard. She's dangerous, sir. She killed 3 of Devlin's men. Devlin, Hartwell interrupted. You mean the same Devlin we just arrested for conspiracy and land fraud? Morrison blinked. Sir? What Hartwell held up a folded telegram. Railroad money, shell companies, bribes traced to your quarters. You've been playing marshal for a crime boss, and now you've got a battlefield on federal land to show for it. The silence was crushing. Behind the ridge, Magnolia listened, her fingers still resting on the trigger. She didn't cry. Not yet. Not even now. Justice didn't sound like trumpets. It sounded like a man with rank saying the truth out loud. Thaddeus finally exhaled. So what now, he asked. Hartwell turned to him. Now, we clean up your yard. We treat the wounded. And we put Morrison and every soldier who followed his illegal orders in chains. Morrison burst forward, panicked. Sir, you don't understand. She's just some saloon girl, Devlin's property. Hartwell drew his revolver, cocked it, held it to Morrison's head. You call her property again, he said low, and I'll bury you next to the men you murdered. Morrison dropped to his knees. Magnolia finally emerged from the rocks, rifle lowered, hands trembling not with fear, but release. Dirt clung to her legs, her cheeks were streaked with soot and blood. But her eyes, clear, bright, alive. Hartwell looked at her. No salute, no judgment. Miss Hayes, he said gently, you're safe now. She nodded once, then collapsed into Thaddeus's arms. Not from weakness, but from the weight she'd carried too long. 12 years of silence had led to this moment. Not a victory, not yet. But justice had finally ridden in. The fire had died. The blood had dried. And for the first time in a long while, the land was quiet. But not the kind of quiet Thaddeus Crane once knew. Not the hollow, aching silence of grief. This quiet breathed. It hummed with wind through new fence posts with the soft creak of wood as the cabin rose again board by board. It carried the smell of bread baking and the faint sound of Magnolia humming under her breath as she swept the porch. 6 months had passed since the smoke cleared. Morrison was in chains. Devlin was behind bars screaming at the walls of a federal prison no one visited. The railroad never laid track through the valley. Turns out, their surveyor's map was mistaken. Or maybe the truth just finally had someone brave enough to stand on it. Thaddeus stood on his rebuilt porch, watching the golden light stretch across the land. He wore a fresh white shirt. His left arm, still stiff from the bullet that nearly stole it, rested gently against his side. Beside him, Magnolia. Her dress was simple, white cotton, hair braided back, face, soft eyes, no longer haunted. She held his hand like she belonged there, not as a guest, not as a survivor, as a woman who chose to stay. The preacher from the next county had just pronounced them husband and wife. No crowd, No ceremony, just the earth beneath their feet and the life they'd fought to reclaim. "No more running," she whispered. Thaddeus nodded. No more hiding. Behind them the cabin glowed with warm lamplight. Inside, plans for a community table, a room to shelter girls who had nowhere else to go. Magnolia's idea. Thaddeus simply said yes. They didn't speak of the past much anymore, but neither did they forget. Some scars stayed, some never would, but the hands that once trembled now built fences. The lips that once screamed now told stories, and the man who once lived alone didn't anymore. He had found something he thought he'd buried with Martha. Purpose. And you, if a stranger showed up at your gate, would you open the door if the law turned its back? Would you stand anyway if justice came too late? Would you still fight for it? Tell me in the comments, because what you would do might just be the start of the next story. Now click on the video waiting at the end of this one, because the next tale, it starts with a girl and a gun and a fire no rain could put out.